Today I'm going to be speaking with Stacy Rossetti about starting your own self-storage business. Now, many of you know I buy and sell houses for a living. I seller finance houses as a strategy, but I take all the money from those one-time cash events and those temporary cash events, and I buy into a forever cash model. And my forever cash model is self-storages. I own about 14 storage locations around the lake where I live at Canyon Lake, Texas. It's about 1,300 doors. And I started out in the smallest of the smallest facilities. My first facility was 13 units. My second facility was 18 units. My next facility was 28 units, and then a 36 unit, and then a 54 unit, and then back down to a 17 unit. But over the years, since 1991, I have taken the money I've made from the real estate investing endeavors, and I have put it into self-storage, boat storage, and mini storage, and open storage, and semi-truck parking storage, and I have built a monster of a cash-producing machine. I brought Stacy in because she's talking about the same way I started. You can start the same way I started. Very small, very achievable, and you can build yourself into whatever you want. So stay tuned, and we're going to be talking to Stacy Rossetti right now. All right, Stacy, we paid the bills, and now it's time to talk about storages. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for letting me come hang out with you today.
Yes, and I'm glad to have you here. So you're from Austin, Texas, which just is a hop, skip, and jump from where I'm at. We're about 70 miles apart, probably. And you sound like you started out a lot like I did, just buying up a bunch of little bitty mom and pop places or something you could afford, kind of progresses into some little bit bigger places. And then who knows what the future holds. But, you know, I started out with 18 units and, well, I started out with 15 units, little boat stalls in front of Comel Park. And then, you know, I had an 18 unit place, and then I had a 54 unit place next. And I just kind of kept going. And then recently I built a $2.8 million, 383 unit first class, ground level facility space on a major highway. And every single one of those steps takes a little bit more knowledge and a little more guts and a lot more money. So you just kind of work your way into it, right? How about you give us a little background on yourself and how you got into the storage business?
Yeah, so actually I live in the North Georgia mountains. So I grew up in Austin, in Pflugerville, actually. Everybody knows Pflugerville. And back when Pflugerville was like 3,000 people, that's when I was there. My family still lives in Austin, so we're there quite often. And we're actually thinking about moving back. So you never know, we might be able to hang out and have a coffee one day. But right now I live in the North Georgia mountains, and we own storage facilities all across Georgia. That's kind of where we buy. That's our hot spot. And I was one of those crazy people that started out rehabbing. 10 years ago, I got into rehabbing, and I was like one of those ones doing like 15 rehabs at a time. And what happened is I got pregnant. And then once I got pregnant, like me as like this like mom to be, I started kind of like freaking out a little bit. And I was like, how am I going to manage these like 15 houses? We had 15 rehabs we were working on at the time. And then we had like 15 rehabs in the pipeline. And in my mind, I was just thinking to myself, how am I going to like manage all these rehabs and have this little tiny baby? And at that time, like we had only been in the business for about 5 years, and I had not thought about passive income at all. I had a couple of rental properties that we had kind of picked up along the way, but I hadn't ever focused on passive income. And so like now me, like as this mother, I was like, okay, like we need to start focusing on passive income. I told my husband, we are not buying houses anymore. We're not buying rehabs. I don't have time for that. I want to be home, stay home with my daughter. And so what happened is that I have a realtor that I've been working with for 10 years, with the same realtor working with the whole time. And so I told him, I was like, look, we're not buying houses anymore. I was like, I want passive income. So get out there and start looking for like some passive income. And so he started sending me like multifamily. And this is back like when like nobody wanted to buy multifamily. Remember those days, like back in like 2014, people were like multifamily, that's crazy. And so like we were looking at like multifamily that wanted rehabs. We were looking at like buying portfolios of houses, because essentially I'm 100% privately funded, just like you. And, all I had to do was essentially once I finished a rehab up, roll that money over into whatever I wanted to buy, right? Kind of a thing. And I had to convince my private lenders, like, hey, can we just like start looking at something else to do? So anyway, so I got pregnant and we started looking for passive income. And luckily my realtor, my very first storage facility that we ever bought, he found a storage facility that was like 20 minutes from our house, which was awesome. I was like, yes, this is perfect. And I drove over to just take a look at it. And it was like the dumpiest, ugliest, grossest storage facility that you could ever imagine. And in fact, when we drove up to the gate, there was like 100 or 200 tires sitting right in like to the left of the gate. Like people had just used it as a dumping ground. We're dumping tires everywhere. And then I peeked into the fence and it was like, it's on 3 acres. And there's a lot of parking. There's like storage, like a strip of storage units. And then around that facility is like all this parking. And I looked in and essentially you could tell the guy was just kind of like, go find a spot, kind of one of these things, and there was like RVs and like boats and like big rigs and dump trucks and tow trucks. They were just like, wherever they found a spot, that was their spot. There was like no rhyme or reason to what he was doing at all. I just looked at that place and I was like, as a rehabber at heart and somebody that just loves like nasty, dumpy places, I was like, this is perfect for me. This is what I think this is a really good deal. And I could just tell by looking at it that the way that he was running it, he was just essentially running it to the ground. That property had been on the market for 5 years and nobody had bought it. And so I just knew, I was like, this is a really, really good opportunity. I didn't really know anything about self-storage investing at all, nothing. But I just knew by looking at it visually that it was going to be a really good deal if I could get it at the price that I wanted it at. And that's basically how it got started.
I hope you're enjoying Stacy's ideas on how to start a self-storage business. Now, before we get back to Stacy and wrap it up, I want you to click on that like button, that share button, and the subscribe button. Okay, it's time to get back to Stacy Rossetti. Yeah, so do you remember the numbers on that first deal?
Yes, he had it on the market for $500,000. It's 64 10 by 10s. So just like one long strip, 64 10 by 10s. And then around the parking, so what we did is we met him. It was Big John's storage. So we went out there, we met him and walked the property. And as we were walking the property, essentially in my mind, I was just kind of visually counting, like how many lanes of parking could we create, right? Because the way that he was doing it, he had just cars everywhere. And so we counted around, and as I walked, I was like, hey, this is probably at least 50 units, at least 50 lanes of parking, and then 64 10 by 10s. I asked him, I said, how much are you making per month? And he said, I'm probably making around $2,000, maybe $2,300 a month. For me personally, when I look at like 50 units at, let's $50 each, that's already $2,500, not including the units, which he told me he was charging $35 for a 10 by 10. So I calculated essentially like, okay, if there's 64 10 by 10s, $35 each or whatever, then that's at least a couple $1,000s for that, plus the parking. Like he should be making like $5,000, right? If he was like, 90% full or whatever. In my mind, and he told me he was making $2,300. So I knew that he was making half of at least like what he was charging as is. That's kind of how I just started out looking at it. Now, when I asked him, I said, can I see your numbers? I want to start looking at your numbers. We were in his office and he literally like opened up his desk and pulled out a ledger. I'm sure you've seen this before, right? They opened up their desk and then he pulled out this ledger and he was literally keeping track of all of the payments he ever got, like in this ledger. I don't know how he kept track of all that stuff, but he did. Now he was a cash only business and he would take checks and cash and that's it, but mostly cash. And most of the time for that cash, he would just pocket that money. So he did not have any income to show at all, really. He had nothing to show. So essentially, in my mind, what I was thinking was like, this person has had this facility on the market for $500,000 for 5 years. Nobody's bought this thing. And he has no income to prove that, so nobody could even go out and get a loan for this thing. Nobody can get a loan. So essentially in these types of properties, these are mismanaged properties. Essentially, you need to have a private lender to lend you the money for this, or you need to have your own money for something like this, right? Because to go and get funding for this from like a bank is almost nearly impossible because, in the commercial real estate world, I mean, this, like it's all income based. They all want to see how much money that you're making. Can you prove this? And then we'll give you a loan based on the income that you're proving. Well, he had nothing to prove. And so essentially what I told him is exactly that. I said, look, like you've had this thing on the market for 5 years. I was like, you're trying to get $500,000 out of it. You can't even prove that you're making $2,300 a month, So in that respect, I'm going to have to go out and get a private lender and pay like double the interest rate of what I would get at a bank. And so because of that, I have to offer you like a really low offer. And that was basically the premise of my offer. So he wanted 500,000. I offered 200,000. And immediately he was like, no, I'm not going to do it. No, I'm out. No, started like freaking out a little bit. And I said, okay, well, just think about it over the next couple of days and just let me know. But essentially, this is just how it works. You're going to have it just sit on the market and because you can't prove that income.
Where did $2,300 a month constitute a $500,000 price anyways, even if you could prove it?
And this is how sellers are. This. Essentially, they just like pick this number in the air.
That they want, their dream number. They pick their dream number, right? Like maybe some dummy will come by and pay me.
Yes, exactly. This is what he thought. And that's why it sat on the market for so long. And this is back in the day when things would sit on the market. And people are getting a little bit crazier with the numbers, I think. I mean, a lot of times, people are happy with like 6 and 7 caps. I have no idea about that. But anyways, so he called me back. He called back a couple of days later and he said he'll take 250. He said that's the lowest he would go. But in my mind, I already knew it was going to be 250 anyways. So we put it under contract for $250,000. And we bought this storage facility and we just had we had no idea what we were doing. We're just like, okay, now we own a storage facility. Now what? Now what do we do? That was the fun part.
Now it's time for me to give to you a free webinar. It's called the Private Money Webinar, and it will change your life. It's not thick, it's not bulky, but it's very rich. And when you learn to raise private money, your whole world is going to change. In fact, the name of my private money course is Private Money Changes Everything. And it's named that for a reason. I've raised over $26 million in private money. I can get money at the snap of a finger. 100,000, 200,000, 400,000, 500,000. If I need money, all I have to do is pick up the phone. I can show you how I did it, and I can show you how to do it. All you have to do is go to 1000houses.com/free-stuff. Scroll up and down the homepage there with all the free stuff I have to offer and find the link that reads Private Money Webinar. Click on it. It'll be digitally downloaded to you and you'll be learning the very, very basics of how I started to raise $26 million. It's important and you'll want to conquer this before your career is over.